independence of Poland was the most important question through the Polish modern history. And the Great War, 1914, 1915, 18, brought back the question of Poland's independence to the diplomatic deliberations of all major powers taking part in that war. Different reasons stood behind. The partition powers, that is Russia, Germany, and Austria-Hungary, pledged some sort of quasi-independence after the war in exchange for Polish support in their war effort. After the Bolsheviks' revolution, France, for instance, envisaged an independent Poland as a link in an anti-German post-war bloc that she wanted to construct. The United States, for instance, saw Poland as an important element of the post-war political architecture in Europe, in line with the principle of self-determination championed by the American president. Almost simultaneous collapse of all these partition powers was a watershed moment in history of Polish strife for independence. It paved the way to full realization of that goal. But it also pointed to the very nature of the dilemma, which is the fact that the existence of a Polish state could never be taken for granted, and was very much a function of proper geopolitical constellations, as much as Polish efforts to establish their sovereignty. In other words, there would be no independent Polish state without fierce determination of Poles. But by on itself, it was always too little. Poland, sandwiched between two dominant and powerful neighbors, which is Germany and Russia, historically speaking, for whom it presented a great geopolitical asset, was able to establish its independence only when these neighbors were in decline. This is exactly what happened in 1918 and in the following years. That is why geopolitics matters so much for Poles then and now. The end of the Great War did not determine the borders of a newly independent Poland. Territorial shape of the country was established only through prolonged, complex, fraught, and sometimes bloody processes. The post-war peace conference in Paris and the Treaty of Versailles of 1919 decided the border with Germany, which was ultimately settled in 1923. The eastern border was the cause of a war with the Bolsheviks Russia, with its dramatic climax at the outskirts of Warsaw in August 1920. The conflict had a much greater geopolitical ramification than just a local border dispute. The Great Polish Victory thwarted Bolsheviks' plans to export communist revolution to Germany and the rest of Western Europe. Sustaining newly gained independence was the main priority during the interwar period, that is through 1939. It required building a strong state and capable armed forces. It also required navigating stormy and murky waters of geopolitics. But overall, the balance of power in Europe was not favorable from the point of view of Polish interests, and it tended to further deteriorate over the time. As already mentioned, Polish independence came into being in a power vacuum in Central and Eastern Europe, resulted from the fall of the three partition powers. Such situation, though, turned out to be short-lived. Treaties may regulate Polish borders, but they did not alter hostility towards Poland felt by its two main adversaries. Germany bitterly contested the new Poland in its western and northern, which in its western and northern parts was carved out of the former German territory, even though it was mostly populated by ethnic Poles. Especially rich in coal deposits and heavy industry in Silesia in the south. I have a historical map of Poland behind me, but I probably will not try to show you where those regions are. And then Pomerania region, which is in the north, which Germans called the corridor because it separated the East Prussia from the rest of the country. This issue caused extremely deep resentment. Germany was set to reverse the decisions put in place by the Treaty of Versailles, and the chances for the success were greater in the east on the border with Poland. And this is exactly where they concentrated their efforts. Such revanchist policy involved anti-Polish diplomatic activities and occasional spikes in tensions between both countries, for instance, in form of economic embargo in 1920. Bolshevik Russia, or the Soviet Union since 1922, was equally determined to eradicate independent Poland. Lenin called Poland a buffer state, which was to separate Germany from direct contact with the Soviet communism. Russia might be communist, but it did not cease to be Russia. It was determined to continue its territorial expansion by claiming all former lands of the Russian Empire in the South Caucasus, Central Asia, and indeed in Europe. And Iran also felt the pressure. Such expansion gained a new ideological rationale in spreading communism, which only masked its proper imperialistic purpose. The tumultuous decades of 20th and 30s of the 20th century were devoted to consolidation of power by the Bolsheviks and building a strong industrial base at a great human cost to sustain its big military potential. Russia and Germany were able to put aside their ideological differences and join forces to undermine the European security architecture and strike against Poland. From the Polish standpoint, to devise a viable answer to such daunting geopolitical threats was not an easy task. Only France seemed to be interested in keeping the Germans down, as we would say, after the Second World War, and actively pursued policies to counterbalance and deter Germany. However, with the passage of time, its political resolve to do it began to wane. Nevertheless, France built alliances with Central and East European countries, including with Poland in 1921. But out of other French allies in the region, Poland was able to forge an anti-Soviet alliance only with Romania. The United Kingdom, after the First World War, returned to its traditional political strategy in Europe, that is to keep a balance between the continental powers and to prevent emergence of a dominant one. In the post-war circumstances, it boiled down to keeping France at bay and preventing further weakening of Germany, of course, at the expense of Germany's neighbors, including Poland. London was not interested in cooperating with Warsaw against Germany in that period. The United States' withdrawal from Europe and succumbing to its isolationist instinct left European powers to deal with the task to solve European security dilemmas alone. Created by American inspiration, the League of Nations, a collective security organization, was missing effective political and military instruments to enforce its decision, and it was incapable of maintaining the peace in Europe and on other continents. Thus, Europe lacked effective deterrence and defense capabilities to face off mounting threats from Germany and Soviet revisionist policies. In the absence of strong defense backing or effective Franco-British leadership, the whole European security architecture was doomed to fall, and with it also the independent Poland. Poland did not stand idle in the face of re-emerging German and Soviet Russian powers. Bitter experience of being left alone in the war against Bolsheviks in 1919 and 1921 undermined confidence in military help from France and the United Kingdom. Even though Poland closed a formal treaty on mutual defense with France, as I mentioned, it became clear that France alone was not able to act as a sole guarantor of the European political order. Building a bloc of countries in Central and Eastern Europe capable of offsetting Germany and the Soviet Union was proved to be unsuccessful. Border disputes between Poland and the Czechoslovakia and Lithuania, as well as strong anti-Hungarian stance of the Czechoslovakia, Romania, and the Yugoslavia, poisoned the relationships between these countries and prevented forging any type of cohesive security alliance. After having shown strong determination to defend itself against anti-Polish propaganda, and after having probed French resolve to help Poland to defend itself, Poland and Germany negotiated a non-aggression agreement in January 1934. This complemented a similar agreement closed with the Soviet Union in 1932. Poland started to act more decisively on the foreign policy arena, showing some boldness, initiative, and creativity. Thus, it could capitalize on relative weaknesses of Nazi Germany in its early stage and Soviet Russia, which were focused on consolidating their political systems, and in the case of the Soviet Union, on breaking its international isolation. This period is often misunderstood as to the motives and nature of the normalization of the relations between Poland and its two main rivals. Critics of the Polish foreign policy of that period usually fail to understand that such normalization was coupled with keeping the same distance between both Berlin and Moscow. In practical terms, it meant that Poland was determined not to ally itself with with Nazi Germany against the Soviet Union, and vice versa. Poland did not allow to be used by the Soviet Union as an instrument of anti-German policy. Tilting towards one or the other would inevitably lead to subjugation of Poland and loss of its sovereignty, whereas decreasing tensions with its neighbors gave Warsaw some time and breathing room to concentrate on other priorities, such as reconstruction of the economy and ambitious program of armed forces modernization. Indeed, Poland stayed true to this policy until the very end, when totalitarian regimes of Germany and Russia forged yet another anti-Polish alliance and divided Central Eastern Europe again into their sphere of influence, which was a recurring feature of the European security policy in modern era. The shapers of the Polish foreign policy were vindicated in their assumptions that the Western powers resolved to stop Nazi Germany in its quest to undermine the Versailles order. Systemic breaches of the treaty provisions regulating Germany's disarmament was met by a policy of acquiescence grounded on hopes that Nazi goals were limited to regaining a status of a great European power and becoming a homeland for German-speaking people in Central Europe. Appeasement, as this policy came to be known, revealed a lack of political will and foresight. It was mostly a psychological problem, though, based on the false assumptions and traumas of the Great War, combined with devastating results of deep economic crisis. It boiled down to failure of understanding of the unprecedented nature of threats posed by the totalitarian regimes striving to implement their utopian visions, freed from self-restraint and conventional norms. Left unchecked, such forces brought about a level of destruction beyond imagination and almost complete annihilation of freedom and democracy in Europe. The final act of the European and the Polish drama unfolded in the wake of the Munich conference in the fall of 1938 and subsequently in 1939. That was their last-ditch effort to satisfy Hitler's appetite for conquest. Marching of the German troops into the Czech capital of Prague in March 1939 was an insult that the Western powers could not swallow. Soon after, the unthinkable happened. The British Prime Minister declared unconditional guarantees for Poland's independence against looming German aggression. Polish-French alliance was renewed. The goal of these diplomatic maneuvers was twofold, I think. First, it was deterring Hitler, or if it failed, making sure that Wehrmacht, that is the German armed forces, would strike Poland first before turning against France and the Great Britain. By promising help to Poland, the Western allies made sure that the Polish army would mount a defense and Poland would not join the German camp. The main problem with these guarantees was, though, that those who offered them had no intention to deliver on their promises. The question whether it was feasible or not, it is a matter for another discussion. The Soviet Union's diplomacy had been also activated during the last months leading to the outbreak of the Second World War. It offered dubious security guarantees against ensuing German aggression. Nevertheless, the Western powers started endless negotiations to create a joint peaceful front with the Soviet Union. With no prospects of meeting his objectives, Stalin, the Soviet dictator, positively responded to the German offer to close a non-aggression treaty between both countries, the so-called Ribbentrop-Molotov Pact. But it had a secret protocol which provided for division of Poland between Germany and Soviet Union, and the Soviet annexation of the Baltic states and part of other countries, especially Romania. The fate of Poland was sealed. Germany invaded Poland on September 1st, 1939, and the Soviet troops followed on September 17th. Even though the Great Britain and France declared war on Germany on September 3rd, the promised help never came. After 5 weeks of fighting in 1939, on two fronts, Poland fell. That is, in a nutshell, this dramatic history of 20 years between the war, shaped by failure of geopolitics to produce stable security environment in Europe between that period, due to the unbalanced potentials between those who are supposed to defend the post-war order and those who were contesting it. as I said in my previous remarks, it was very much a political question, a question of will. Then another very important lesson of that history was the importance of effective deterrence based not on paper guarantees, but on actual commitments, including physical presence of Allied troops on the territory of Poland. And if you look at the Polish security policy these days, with the strengthening NATO, inviting stationing of NATO troops, including American ones, on the Polish territory. This is exactly the lesson which was drawn from the dramatic history of Poland in 1939. Another very important lesson is that effective defense needs to be strengthened, but a strong regional cooperation. And this also points to the importance of good neighborly relations. And then I would close with emphasizing the importance of the European integration as a completely new paradigm of solving the political and economic problems in Europe, replacing traditional competition based on strict nationalistic reading of countries' interests with peaceful cooperation and strong mutual interdependence in the economic sphere, but also in political sphere. I will stop here, and then once again, thank you very much for your time and for your interest, and I am at your disposal. Over to you, Doctor.
Thank you. Dziękuję bardzo. Thank you for the outstanding lecture you gave. It was really informative and interesting. Let's move on question and comments. As I told any panelists, if you want to actually have any comments, you can just unmute yourself and then talk. But the attendees, if you have any questions or comment, you can raise your hand, or you can actually put your question in the chat room. So do we have, okay, I received another one. Okay, I received another one in the queue in question. They're asking about, I think the question is to Mr. Ambassador or even Mr. Pisarski. They're asking about how do you see, but I think it's not related to your exact lecture, but one of our guests actually asking about how do you see the Iranian and Polish relationship in the next decade? I mean, after the pandemic. Do you see that they're gonna actually have a partnership, especially based on the East European neighborhood policy? Is there any options, or is there any chance to have a closer relationship, something like that? Yeah. Mr. Ambassador or Mr. Pisarski, if you have any comments, we'll be glad to hear it.
If you allow me, I will take this question. It's pertaining perhaps more the mission of ambassador and the embassy and foreign ministers as those in lead of building relationship. And yes, I'm quite positive that the prospects are there. It depends, of course, on many circumstances. Some of them are quite independent from us. So when it comes to a political dialogue, I think that we are at the verge of new era, and all of us are asking ourselves the same questions: what will follow the pandemic era, and how our economies and our societies will adapt to the new realities, and what tools and assets and what resources do we have in hand to better formulate our policies, to better identify the goals which are ahead, not to make it up retrospectively. I think that the new times will bring completely new challenges and completely new questions. One of them is definitely digital revolution, climate change, and the related problems, how to mitigate this process, and multilateralism. So I think that, and I believe that Iran will form an important part of this global debate. And on this forum, we will have to look collectively at what we can do as a global community. When it comes to bilateral issues, I think that economic cooperation has been raised on several instances during our discussions, and this is something that we'll look attentively. As we all know, the circumstances are not very conducive, not very encouraging right now, but we look forward to some change in this respect as well. When it comes to cultural cooperation, I think this is one of the most interesting and unexplored issue. We have signs from many corners, from all in Iran, many questions, many voices raising the need to intensify the cooperation in this domain. But here the pandemic stands in a way. I think we cannot overcome these objective problems, and I think that especially cultural cooperation requires this people-to-people contact. We cannot do online too many things in this domain. However, I must say that over the last half a year, we were able to produce an interesting exhibition on design. Notably, the Iranian young designers, the students of industrial design school at the University of Tehran, joined forces with Polish counterparts to produce furnitures that display some different motifs taken from Polish and Iranian cultures, and this has been very successful project. It's still ongoing, so I think there is also opportunity to work online or on distance. When it comes to the geostrategic questions, I think that Middle East region and Central and Eastern Europe are facing problems, but I'm not quite sure if they are quite similar in nature and intensity. But I think that both nations, both countries are acute to the question of peaceful resolution of the conflicts, and are looking for the solutions that are sustainable, respectively, in their own regions. We have our challenges. You perfectly know what it's all about. We are over here observing and following the talks that are undergoing right now and that pertain specifically to the Iranian questions. So I think, yes, the dynamics is there on both sides, but we'll be able to think about a collective solutions or norms or standards. This is still to be seen. I'm not sure. But what I observe and what I'm very positive about is that there is a strong will on both sides to pursue the dialogue on different fields. And yeah, I think that this is the precondition that is already met, and which will allow us to continue with the talks and cooperation in the next months, in the years to come. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Pisarski. Do you have any comments?
Just just a very short one, because I fully agree with Ambassador Falkowski, and he painted a kind of comprehensive picture of the prospects of Polish-Iranian relations in the next years. I would only add that what binds Poles and Iranians together is a very special sense of geopolitics and a very special sense of awareness of the importance of things that are sometimes beyond our control, but they are key in shaping our paths, our destinies. So I would say that both countries can gain much more from talking to each other about these geopolitical challenges, and then help each other to better understand their predicaments, because even though the current pandemics may slow down this kind of crazy pace of globalization, it did not erase this dense network of interdependence. It will stay with us, regardless of what happens, I believe. So there is a great deal to learn from one another. And I think also that the academic institutions like yours are very well poised to explore these issues further, because I fully agree that bilateral relations are important. Economic cooperation has a great potential. Cultural has an untapped potential, but I think that also in kind of discussing about the current world around us would be a great field for academic cooperation. That would be my pitch. Thanks.
Wonderful, thank you. Mr. Ambassador, do you have any comments? Because I see you did raise your hand.
Yes, I think that Director Pisarski made a very, very valid point. I missed this, but actually I alluded to this issue during my welcoming remarks, let's say, notably that Poland and Iran are among those nations, those countries that have been touched very heavily by geopolitics. And Director Pisarski very eloquently and academically explained what was the situation of Poland after the Great War and how we sought the balancing between finding ourselves between two powers, regional powers, Germany and Russia, and we eventually failed, but we did what we could really to prevent this happening. And I can say that Iran and or Persia was in a similar situation at the time, which brought us together in Geneva, in the League of Nations, to work on the definition of a foreign invasion. So it was the first contemporary definition of foreign invasion that was contained in a formal legal international document. That was part of the effort, of course, to mitigate any antagonistic policies or moves that would endanger our fragile sovereignty at the time. So I think there is lots of learned from each other, and we can, of course, spend long hours discussing where we are and what were our strategic choices and how the geopolitics formed and shaped our strategic thinking over the decades. So we can compare the notes, and this would be wonderful academic exercise, not only academic and practical, but because of policymakers could draw a lot from this exchange. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Mr. Wali, I think you have a comment.
خیلی متشکرم. من باز استفاده کردم از توضیحات تکمیلی جناب آقای سفیر و همکار محترمم در وزارت امور خارجه لهستان که هم مطالب ارزشمندی رو در مورد در واقع یک روند تاریخی اینتربلیک لهستان ارائه کردن که شاید جا داشت که یک اشاره‌ای هم به در واقع نقش ارزشمند لهستان در فروپاشی کمونیسم بکنن، چرا که لهستان اولین کشوری بود که از طریق همون به اصطلاح سندیکای کشتیرانی و در واقع نهضت‌های کارگری توانست که در واقع در فروپاشی اردوگاه آهنین کمونیسم نقش قابل توجهی داشته باشه. منتها در بحث روابط دو جانبه خب هم جناب سفیر هم و دیگر دوستان اشاره کردن به یک ظرفیت بالقوه بسیار بالا. به نظر میاد که ما باید در تبدیل شدن به بالفعل این ظرفیت ها و یک موضوع هم که در یک مقطعی در واقع به شکلی سایه انداخته بود روی روابط، یعنی به نوعی دخیل کردن عناصر ثالث در روابط. یعنی این موضوع بسیار مهمی است که ما باید بر اساس منافع متقابل دو ملت و دو دولت در مسیر ارتقای تعاملات و ارتباطات خودمون کار بکنیم و اجازه ندیم که در واقع عناصر ثالث از به اصطلاح ظرفیت ما یا از امکانات ما بر علیه طرف دیگری بخواد استفاده بکنه. این به نظرم یک ملاحظه بسیار مهم است که ما باید بهش دقت داشته باشیم تا بتونیم دستاورد بهتری رو برای روابط دو کشور داشته باشیم، خصوصا که الان ما شاهد یک تغییر در واقع فاندامنتال و بسیار مهم هستیم با رفتن آقای ترامپ از کاخ سفید. یعنی این به نظرم موضوع مهمیه و اقداماتی هم که الان در رابطه با بحث برجام و مذاکرات در اروپا در حال انجام است به نظرم این بسیار مهم هست. لهستان هم کشور مهمی در اتحادیه اروپا است، هم در پارلمان اروپا هم در ساختارهای اروپایی. به هر حال ما باید در هر جایی که امکان و ظرفیت داریم به نفع منافع و روابط متقابل استفاده کنیم، همونطور که دولت و ملت ایران در مقاطع مختلف تاریخی نشون دادن که هر جا مردم و دولت لهستان نیازی داشتن به شکل بسیار برجسته این نقش رو ایفا کردن. مجددا خیلی متشکرم.
ممنون. مرسی. Thank you very much. Actually, I received a couple of more questions. Just we are really on time, so I try to finish in 10, not more than 10-15 minutes. One question probably it's going to Mr. Ambassador. It's about actually one of our students probably he's asking about the relation between the current situation of academic relation between Iran and Poland, and probably mostly between the universities. Is there any specific plan for the future, or I think this student probably he meant the exchange program between universities in Poland and Iran, because if you remember, a couple of years ago we had the Salam program between universities, so some students from Europe or from Poland or from Iran could be exchange students in a couple of universities. Probably the question is about this matter.
Yes, I think we will definitely continue with the project that are ongoing. So there are no plans really to cut them down or suspend, but we are seeking actively for the new areas of cooperation. And we try to to look for inspiration in other areas, like economy, for example. So let me tell you that the exhibition of this modern design was supported by University of Tehran and some Polish academic establishments as well.
Yeah, sure.
That we look at is between universities and law schools that would look at the issue called restorative justice. Separately, we see the cooperation of schools of Iranian studies, that is obviously in a very focus of our embassy to foster exchange of students and academics. And I understand there are some scholarships there that help this exchange. What else? Independently from our actions, we see academic traffic going back and forth. There is a quite sizable number of Iranian students studying at Polish universities, but this is on very initiative and very costs. But hopefully it will also help us to develop structural academic cooperation, expanding it on other fields. So for the time being, I think that yes, we can say it's underfinanced. It might be also understaffed. The interest is still strong, and this is, I think, the most important observation. So let us work on it. Let us continue. I think that end of pandemic would bring some new dynamics into it, and will return to the regular contacts and a regular exchange. And this is all I can say at the very moment. So to summarize, we are looking actively for the new fields. With the end of pandemic, I think we'll get back to the business as usual. When it comes to the academic offer, it's still open for Iranian youth. Anyone interested may apply and go to Poland to study. Yes, this is how I see it, rather positive. Thank you.
Sure, thank you. Yeah, actually, I can just add just one comment that even still Erasmus Plus is one of the platforms between actually European universities and even neighboring of Europe universities. I think a couple of universities in Iran actually joined to Erasmus Plus. So, and Poland is one of the hosts of that plan. Let me actually ask another question. What is the level of current cultural relation between Iran and Poland? And what do you see, what kind of obstacles actually you can see that can stop or can reduce the cultural relations?
Well, let me refer to 2019. I think it's the proper reference, as we know that pandemic put a curb to physical interactions. But in 2019, I remember we had quite a few interesting cultural events that included also a travel of artists from Iran to Poland and from Poland to Iran. We hosted an exhibition of Polish posters. We also hosted Polish directors, movie directors at European Film Festival in Iran. We hosted Polish musicians, Polish performers. We took part and supported the launch of the Iranian translations of Polish literature, say that way. So I think that I had some personal plans and quite advanced commitments made with Maestro Penderecki, who passed away unfortunately last year, and he promised me to come over to Iran to give a big concert in Vadat Hall. So I was in a contact with respective authorities and companies to organize this event. So I think that the cultural cooperation stands quite well. We can, of course, do lots more. I hear from many Iranian young artists about very interesting, for example, Grotowski. The topic in itself quite interesting. Of course, his treaty about humble theater is well known and well studied in Iran. But what struck me is that this interest is still fresh and still vivid, and very young Iranians still want to rediscover, study Grotowski and his school of theater. And there are many examples. Also, Tadeusz Kantor is very popular. Tad Gardzienice. So when it comes to the theater, Polish theater, I think we can do a lot. So this is as much as performing art is concerned. When it comes to movies, there is also great interest in showing Iranian cinematography in Poland. We support one Iranian young director who shot a movie about Polish refugees in Iran. That is still an ongoing project, as I mentioned, put on hold due to pandemic. So I think in this domain we see some interactions, some interest, some movement. I'm quite positive about it. Thank you.
Thank you, dear Ambassador. Actually, I received another question. I think that one probably goes to Director Pisarski. One of our students asked, what is the priorities of Polish policies toward the Middle East? I mean, probably current and the future, because as I remember, a couple of years ago, probably you were one of the author of that policy Poland has a new policy toward the Middle East. So his question is, what is the priorities of this policy toward the Middle East? Director, yeah.
Oh, yes, yeah. Thank you. Thank you for this question. The problem with Middle East, and it was also a problem of Central Eastern Europe, is that both produced too much history that they could consume. So these two regions have also this in common, that have been a ground for this geopolitical rivalry. We have a very few specific priorities related to the Middle East, and of course, first priority pertains to security. For too long, the Middle East was this, let's say, source of instability and conflicts, to the detriment to its own people and countries in the region. Sometimes it had some negative consequences also for the European countries. So first priority would be to help to bring about peace in Middle East, to end conflicts, and to provide for a stable and peaceful security situation, which would allow countries in the region to cooperate into the greater degree among themselves, but also with the rest of the world. But of course, we can only achieve this goal by working closely with Middle Eastern partners, and also because you are the main stakeholders here, and also we support the effort of the international communities in this regard, be it in the United Nations. A year ago, I mean, actually between 2018 and 2019, Poland was a non-permanent member of the UN Security Council, and we spend a lot of effort to help to bring more stability and peace to the region. We are also a member of the European Union, and the European Union has an extensive Middle East policy, and Poland has contributed to this policy and will stay very much involved. Then, and I will get back to the points that were raised by the ambassador and by my esteemed colleague from the Iranian foreign ministry. There is a great economic potential, and then we see more and more interest on behalf of Polish investors and entrepreneurs. Middle Eastern companies are becoming also more interested in Polish market. So this is definitely something that we have in mind. Then again, I would say that because the world is becoming more global, more closely knit together, we are interested in seeking more engagement, more exchanges with the Middle Eastern countries. Probably I have forgotten about something, but I would say that those three dimensions would be the most important. Thank you.
Thank you. That was very kind of you. And it's a last question that then we try to finalize our panel. Despite the international sanction or US sanctions against Iran, are you optimistic about extending cultural ties and economic ties? How do you see the sanctions?
This is on me, yes?
Yeah.
Yes, sorry. Yes. Well, when Ambassador mentioned that there are things beyond our control, and sanctions belong to this category. That Poland very much supports the negotiated framework between Iran and other great powers in the form of JCPOA. We are still hoping that this agreement can be revitalized, and then you mentioned my esteemed colleague from Iranian Foreign Ministry mentioned that there is new administration in Washington. We are very much looking forward to some sort of negotiations between Washington and Iran, and how to revitalize JCPOA. It would be of enormous help to improving the economic environment and improving terms of trade and investment. This is just a reality we need to take into account. But I think that there's also Ambassador was talking about that. There's also some room for bilateral cooperation, and this is something that we have have a greater influence on. So I would stop here. I don't know, Ambassador, if you would like to add anything.
Yes, well, I fully agree with your appraisal of the situation, and also want to underscore our commitment and our support to the talks that are undergoing this morning. Another session of negotiation began in Vienna. We keep fingers crossed and we look forward to some tangible effects, if not this time, perhaps in the months to come. But I think that the pandemic also taught us about something very important, that we should look at this topic jointly. I mean, the security and economy and well-being are indispensably related with each other. Let's add to it green revolution that is related to the climate change and imperative to mitigate the risk related stemming from global warming. Let us mention also digital revolution. So we can add at least several other issues to the list, to the very short list of the topics that required a global response. And I think that with this awareness, when we approach the particular issues, we will be less tempted to compare, to see it as a separate issue. So I think that Iran is definitely indispensable part of an regional and some of the global solutions. That's out of questions. So we're looking forward to work very hard with Iranian counterparts on these issues. Yes, thank you.
Thank you. We are all hopeful to see there's improvement between actually bilateral relation between both countries. For the last, I didn't receive any question, just Mr. Nima, actually, I think you're gonna actually talk. If you're gonna talk, you can unmute it. Otherwise, we can actually stop the panel and going for the break.
Yes, hello everyone.
Hello, we do hear you.
Okay, so I'm quite thankful to all of you for such a great opportunity, and especially for the amazing host, our dear Professor Mr. Ashtiani, who always, give us amazing opportunities to interact with the people who in a normal life, maybe we cannot see them very easily. But here I have two questions. The first question is, as we are moving toward more contemporary matters from the kind of World War situation, I think now with the tension rising in Ukraine and Russia border, and then as we have some people from the foreign minister here, Mr. Respectful Mr. Director, Mr. Pisareski, I wanted to know that on these occasions, on the occasions of the tension of Russia with the countries east of Poland, taking Ukraine, Belarus, and all of these. Normally, what's the stance of Poland in these situations? And the other question is, as mentioned a bit about the kind of bilateral relations of Poland and Iran, and the hope for the future. I wanted to know if there is any plan in the hand, specifically with the kind of empowerment of the Democrats in America. I know one part of the whole relation of the world with Iran is now kind of summarized in this Barjam, or as they call it, GPOA, I don't know. But does Poland specifically have any plan or anything, any outline on the kind of broadening this situation, this relation with Iran or not? Thank you very much.
Yes. Thank you for those questions. I mean, Ukraine, this is a topic we could spend hours talking about, but I will try to be very, very brief on that. Poland stance on Ukraine is very clear. Poland fully supports full independence and full territorial integrity of Ukraine, both as our neighbor and country that has a lot of influence on the security and stability in our part in Europe and in Europe as a whole, but also as an international law principle. No country should be a subject of aggression and for the sake of territorial gains. And this is what happened in 2014 with Russia's annexation of Crimea and Russia's instigating a war in eastern Ukraine. These are very dangerous developments because they are bringing back to such a complicated and painful historical European history element of war, element of coercion on the scale of war back to the European security policy. This is something we fought, we worked out successfully. It turned out not to be the case. So here on this issue, Poland stands very firmly together with European Union and our allies. We are also helping Ukraine in its quest to reform its country. We have, of course, a lot at stake here because this is our immediate neighbor. So having Ukraine as a functional state and functional economy is of key importance. Poland also has initiated and animated a robust cooperation agreement between the European Union and Ukraine, for instance. This is part of the Eastern Partnership. So yes, so these are one of our most important priorities to ensure the integrity of borders, to ensure the elimination of war as an instrument of political maneuvering, and then help Ukraine to reform itself, because that would send an extremely important signal to the rest of Eastern Europe that reforms are possible. On the second issue, I believe we have had a constant political exchange on the level of foreign ministers. We consider Iran as one of our most important partners in Middle East, and I am not familiar with any incoming plans, but I can assure you that we are determined to keep these diplomatic channels open and continue the conversations. I'm very glad that Ambassador mentioned these new areas like digital, like climate issues that are becoming so prominent in Europe, and I think that these new fields would constitute new opportunities for our cooperation. That's on my side.
Thank you. I think we are ran out of time. So if there is no any other comments, we can actually stop it here. Our debate, it was great debate, a great discussion. I do really appreciate all of you, especially both of you, Mr. Director and Mr. Ambassador. It was a great talk. Just actually, I want to mention about the next panel. Next panel is at 2:30 in Tehran time zone, and in Warsaw or Central European zone time zone is at 12 p.m. So we will be glad to see you again in the next panels today and tomorrow. Thank you for everyone. Thank you for your time and patience. We had almost 50 participants roughly on Zoom, and on YouTube almost we had 10 to 20 on YouTube. It was great to see all of you, and we will see you in the next panels. Thank you.
Thank you very much for having me. Thank you for your interest. I've enjoyed this meeting a lot. It gave me a lot of new knowledge, and then I wish you all the best. Khuda Hafiz.
Khuda Hafiz. Hope to see you soon in Tehran.
Thank you.
Take care.
Dzień dobry, panie ambasadorze.